So, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how MLS was potentially going to change their playoff format, and I think I mentioned this in one of the episode in the news of the week. And Lord and behold, a couple of weeks later, and today, they have officially announced that they are going to change the playoff format for next season, and that they are going to expand the playoffs to now 14 teams, and that now instead of just 6 teams in each conference that is going to be going to the playoffs, there's going to be now 7 teams that is going to be in the playoffs. And in terms of the overall format and the overall bracket, it's still going to be the same. You're still going to have a knockout round. You're still going to be having a conference semifinal. You're still going to have a conference final. And of course, we're still going to have an MLS Cup. But instead of how in the knockout round where there is going to be just a single elimination game and the conference semifinal from then on until the MLS Cup is a two-legged affair, that is not going to be the case anymore. The two-legged affair is now officially gone in this playoff format, and that now we're just going to have single elimination for all of the rounds. So basically the conference semifinal and the conference final is going to be just like the knockout round, where it's just going to be single elimination, and the team that has the higher seed will have the home field advantage. So it's kind of similar to what the NFL is trying to do, with how in the NFL they have the knockout round, and then they have a couple of teams that have a bye for the knockout round, and then they of course get to play in the conference semifinal. And in terms of the how the bye will go in this new playoff format, well, now there's not going to be 2 teams from each conference, and that the top 2 team in each conference is going to get a bye. There's only 1 team now that is going to get a bye into the next round, and the top team from each conference will get a bye heading into the playoffs, and that they don't have to play until the conference semifinal. So now the second place team basically will have to play in the knockout round. And when I look at this format, and when I just overall, when you look at this format, there's definitely some advantage and there's definitely some disadvantage. And also, I forgot to mention the fact that the decision day is actually going to be a little bit earlier this season instead of last season. Last season it ended on October 28th, and next year decision day is going to end on October 6th. So it's about 3 weeks earlier than when decision day is going to end, and also the season is going to end a little bit earlier too. Instead of the season going all the way into December, we're now going to end our season in November 10th, and it's actually going to be ending right before the international break, which has been one of the big reason why we decided to try to have a change in the playoff format, is that there's been always a lot of discussion about how the international break really just breaks the rhythm of each team in the playoffs, and that it's just so unfair, the fact that why in the world does the playoffs has to be put on a hold for 2 weeks because of the international break, and then we head into the conference final. Well, with this new format, that will no longer be a conflict. The season will be just ending before the international break, which is going to be around November 11th, and the season will end on November 10th. And I also think that with this format, this means that the playoffs is going to be technically a little bit shorter, since the playoffs begins, as I'm looking right here, it says it's going to begin on October 16th and it's going to be ending in November 10th. So that's going to be less than a month where the playoffs is going to take place, which means that it will be shorter than the previous one where the playoffs begin in late October and then it runs all the way into November. Now, talking about the advantage and the disadvantage that I see with this playoff format, the advantage of this playoff format is that, we avoid the international break, so that's one advantage. And the second advantage is that if you are a higher seed team, then yeah, you have a huge advantage in terms of this playoff format. You're going to get home field advantage every single game. So if you're Atlanta United and you basically are the best team in the league, that means you're just going to have home field advantage, and that every single playoff game will be at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and that for all the team that is below them, in order for them to get into MLS Cup and win MLS Cup, it has to go through Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So that's kind of a big advantage for now bigger teams, and that now teams that with a higher seed will definitely have a huge advantage, because home field advantage in the playoffs is very important. I know this season in the knockout round we saw 3 of the 4 teams that were in that had home field advantage in the knockout round in a single leg elimination got eliminated. But when you look at historically in the playoffs, home teams tends to do much better at home than it is for road team. And that's also where I'm going to talk about the disadvantage in terms of this playoffs, is that means the lower seed team is going to have a huge disadvantage, which means that now the lower seed team, in the past, lower seed team, when they head into the knockout round, that is really the only round, besides if they do get to MLS Cup, where they're not going to be guaranteed a home game in the playoffs. If they were able to eliminate a higher seed team in the knockout round, then they're going to guarantee to have a home game in the first leg in the conference semifinal and also the conference final. But in this format, that is not going to be the case, because with the two-legged affair being eliminated and how each team will get a home game in those two-legged affair, that means now that if you're a 6-7 seed team, or like last season RSL or even the Portland Timbers, you being in the lower seed, that means that in this format you're going to have to play every single playoff game on the road, and that is an absolute brutal task to do. And it also means that in the regular season, it just means very important that not only you of course want to be in the playoffs, but you got to make sure that you need to get the higher seed. You have to make sure that you can't just like finish in 5th or 6th and expect that potentially you're going to get a home game in the playoffs. No, you're going to have to try to battle for 4th or 3rd or even in the 2nd spot, so you can get a home field advantage in some of the playoff game. And like I said, historically, home teams tends to do much better in the playoffs than it is in terms of away teams. So yeah, that of course is a huge disadvantage now to lower seed team. Now, I think the other disadvantage that I see with this playoff format is the fact that now that since there's 14 teams in the playoffs, we once again have more than half of the team that is going to be qualified in the playoffs. And this is something that a lot of fans did not like this idea, and I think just this season we finally have kind of the balance where not going to be more than half of the team is going to make the playoffs. I think this season it's actually less than half of the team this season that that was able to make the playoffs this season, because there's 23 teams and there are 12 teams that makes the playoffs this season. So yeah, that's less than half of the team that was able to qualify in the playoffs. But now with this new format, that means now once again more than half of the team in MLS are able to qualify in the playoffs, and it just goes back to the problem we had a couple of years ago when the playoffs was expanded to 6 teams, and that more than half of the team were able to go to the playoffs. And now you're going to get more teams like RSL, for example, that makes the playoffs, or even the Quakes that makes the playoffs, where you don't think that they belong in the playoffs. But on the other hand, it could go either way in terms of these lower seed team. I mean, RSL last season, they weren't expected to be in the playoffs, and look what happened in the knockout round. They upset LAFC and move on into the conference semifinal, and they barely lost to Sporting KC. They almost pull off another upset against Sporting KC and almost went into the conference final. But you could be also like the Quakes, where they had a minus 22 goal differential, and once they head into the playoffs, they got absolutely smacked by the Whitecaps 5-0 in that playoff round. So it can go either way in terms of teams that are not playoff worthy to go into the playoffs. You know, for me as a Quakes fan, and I think this might be a little bit biased because the Quakes usually don't go to the playoffs very often, and we are always considered kind of a lower tier kind of team in the league. I kind of like the idea that we will be making the playoffs and potentially we will actually have a shot of maybe pull off a couple of big upset and heading into MLS Cup. But I'm pretty sure for the bigger team, and I'm pretty sure for the teams that regularly make the playoffs, they would not be happy with this format because now you're going to, like, unless you're the top team in the league, every team will have to play in that knockout round. And knowing the knockout round and knowing what we saw this season, how chaotic it is, yeah, that's not gonna be a recipe for success for these higher team to potentially move on into the next round. Although it also goes back to what I said, how the advantage of these higher seed teams in the playoffs is that at least you're going to get home field advantage throughout the game, throughout the playoff game. So there's one advantage, and there's also one disadvantage of being a higher seed in the new playoff format. But overall, I want to let you guys in the comments below talk about what do you think of this playoff format? Do you think it is a good playoff format? Do you see some advantage and some disadvantage in terms of this playoff format? Because I certainly do. And also, one of the other thing about this playoff format that kind of affects the regular season is that means the regular season is going to be much shorter. And that means that there's going to be more midweek games. And midweek games are usually the one that does not draw a lot of attendance. Which means that I'm hoping this would not cause the attendance to drop a little bit. I mean, whatever happens, I think next season we're going to once again have a record amount of fans show up to MLS game in total because now we have another team heading into the league, FC Cincinnati, and most likely they're going to sell out every single game that they play at home. So that means that's going to booster up the attendance. But does that mean that the average attendance is going to go down because that there's going to be more midweek games, and that the midweek games are usually the one that not a lot of people usually show up? So we'll see how that is gonna go. And like I said, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this new format? Do you like this new format? Do you hate this new format? But yeah, let me know in the comments below, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I of course will see you guys next time.